Oh my God.
Welcome to Georgia State.
They told me I get whatever chair's left.
Well, you got a pretty good chair, so start it off here. Actually, we're going to start off with music.
Music, good.
Yeah, we're going to start off with music. So for many of us, we think back of our youth, we very much look at through the lens of the music we were listening to in the day. So what were you listening to back when you started designing computer circuit boards?
Well, listening to a lot of what's called classic rock now, but Bob Dylan stuff really struck me because I thought, how does a human brain put together these words, these combinations? It was sort of that element of poetry, because I wasn't really a literature major, and that was the closest thing to it. And it had content, it had direction. What was right and wrong, and how you should live your life, and it kind of pointed out, metaphorically, what some wrongs in the world, and that was very important to me. And grew up with. I was lucky in the '60s. The music you grew up with, it was an incredible time. And Steve Jobs and I would talk about that quite a bit, and we'd go to all the little nearby universities and haunt the record stores for the bootleg Bob Dylan albums. Some of them would be on yellow vinyl and orange vinyl and green vinyl. They were very strange, and they were stuff that wasn't put out by the studios.
Well, that makes me feel a lot better, because I was listening to Dylan last night as I reviewed the questions that were submitted for this. So hit close to the mark. That's what are you listening to today?
But you know what? Music's been such an important part of my life because it was part of the developmental phase. College years and really discovering it and going to those first concerts of your life. And sometimes a certain instrument hits you and it just changes your life forever. So to this day, yeah, my wife and I, we love to go to about 50 concerts a year. Not the huge, big arena ones that everybody knows the names of. The little lesser known ones that we hear on certain esoteric channels on XM radio.
Well, somebody in here is probably tweeting, so do you want to give a shout out to any particular bands?
Any particular bands? Well, no, I mean, Airborne Toxic Event, Old 97s, Reckless Kelly, like a little of that country stuff. And I meet a lot of them. And Lana Del Rey, I'm telling you, she's a vocalist that got a lot of bad publicity in the States, very popular overseas, but what she does with her voice. And a lot of little smaller ones I meet, they're in the folk arena, you wouldn't know a lot of them. Ariana Gillis from Canada, man, my favorite singer right now. She's more than just songs. A good singer, is on a stage, they're a presenter, and you're looking at the person. Whoa, I didn't know that little monster was in that body.
Well, music's a form of art, but it's. I've read that you also consider the best engineering to be art, and that many have said that your designs of the Apple I and the Apple II circuit boards were in fact manifestations of engineering as art. Talk about this. How do you see great engineering as art?
And they sometimes called me like a Da Vinci or something of computer design, but it was engineers of the time looking at the designs and judging them by their quality. Now, there's an area of the world that considers art and technology, that the modern technology helps artists create great art things. Sculptures out of lights and, a lot of this virtual world stuff too. But to me, the art was, I knew that the way I designed things were using methods in my head that were never in any book. Couldn't be in a book. Everything I ever designed for Apple never came out of data sheets or only looking at the tiniest components. How can I connect these wires and do it myself, my way? Different ways than ever before, and I knew that great artists must go through the same thinking. Little tiny steps, little tiny strokes on a painting that add up to the whole, and it's very, very difficult. Every little tiny part of it, aspect of any art, be it a music composition, every little note is so critical that it be so, so right or so perfect, better than almost any other human being could do, and then you're a great artist. And I ran into a few people that were like that in my time at Apple, a few other engineers, but not very many. It was about 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20. And they always cared to show you their code, why it was so perfect or contrite, or elegant in some particular way. They really cared about it being good and not just being working.
Do you differentiate between design and engineering, or is design where engineers express themselves?
I don't know. To me, I was called a design engineer, even at Hewlett-Packard, designing the handheld scientific calculators. And that was, so my work of connecting chips, writing code, was called design too. I think design nowadays is taken to mean largely the overall look at the completed product, the thing that will pull out of a box, not the circuitry inside. And that sort of gets into the artistic area. that I don't know, maybe I could have been good at it, but I was always too afraid to ever try. So I think of myself as like the worst artist in the world to try to draw something and make it look pretty. It'd be like stick figures coming out of me. So, but boy, do I admire it. You know, it's like a song. You listen to it, and you know by your own judging, it's good. Somebody else, you can't tell them. They have to hear it. Real art, you have to experience with your own senses. A real product that's going to be great, you have to see it, you have to hold it in your hand, and you say, wow, there's something about it that gets to you. So, boy, I just admire, it's very important to me, products that look better. And you know, and as I grew up, before Apple even, Sony had that status in the world. Their products always looked a little better, a little sleeker, a little cleaner than the competition.
Well, this is a student question. It says, engineers are perfectionists. How do you reconcile perfectionism with real-world constraints like deadlines and other things in the real world?
Well, one of the things is to treat a company as though all of the workers, particularly engineers, are a major part of the company, that are involved in the future direction of the company. Their ideas can be espoused upwards. Ideas don't come only from the top down in big companies. I was very lucky to get this inspiration from working at Hewlett-Packard in an era when it was a different company. Hewlett-Packard only made instruments used by engineers. So every engineer at Hewlett-Packard was designing equipment for themselves. They knew what was good and what was bad. So giving that feeling that you're a part of the solution, and you have to, once you buy into it, if you feel like you're part of a company, like this is my family, this is where I get my income, this pays for my apartment, you know, you start to realize the first goal, company does have to make a profit to be around, or it's not going to make future great products. Let's say you're at a company making something really great, maybe it's your own startup. The trouble is, if you don't make profit, you're not going to be able to reinvest it to make something even better, to really take steps forward. So things like deadlines are important. It's a little disappointing, though. As an engineer, sometimes if you're playing around with parts, you get an idea, my gosh, here's how I could improve it by making a change here. So companies should not make it difficult for engineers to get through quick changes after the project was totally defined in 40-page document of every little aspect of code and hardware that would be in it. It's defined, and then the engineer has to stick to that and can't even add anything good. Those are bad things that happen sometimes, you know, just to get things controlled with management so that the company knows what's coming out when, and that's bad.
So was that easier to do when you were building products in a garage?
Well, I had an advantage. All of my stuff I did independently, single-handed, because I crossed a lot of disciplines. I grew up building things, ham radio, when I was 10 years old. So I would come up with ideas, I would think it out, I'd draw these chips on paper, and I'd gotten good over decades of life, you know, long time, getting better and better at techniques that weren't in any books. And so I would design it. Then I would lay it out and solder all the chips and decide where they go on a board so they're placed correctly and close to the right chips, solder the wires to their pins, hook it up, test it. I'd write the software. I did just all the jobs. So I didn't have to go to somebody else. I also didn't have to say, I'll make my part good and they make their part good. I saw the whole picture and make the whole picture good. And that really is what Steve Jobs spoke of in later years as to what makes a great product. It's really kind of one mind that gets all the pieces working correctly together the way they should. Yeah.
Since you mentioned Steve, and we've mentioned student questions, like Steve and like Bill Gates, at one point you dropped out of college. But unlike Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, you went back and finished. Why'd you go back? Why'd you go back to school and get your degree?
Well, a lot of them dropped out of college to start a company, the biggest thing in life, you know. And me, I accidentally got offered. I took 1 year off after 2 years of college to earn the money for my third year of college because my ethical foundation said I should pay my own way and not borrow. And then after my third year of college, I had to take another year off to earn the money for my fourth year of college. Got these incredible jobs, Hewlett-Packard designing the hottest iPhone 5 type product of its day, the handheld scientific calculator. And then all these ideas that came along in my head, you know, the Arpanet came about and building projects, and it led up to Apple. So I didn't get back to college for 10 years, but I didn't really drop out. I just intended to take 1 year off that became 10 years. And I went back, just a little message that I can tell my kids what school I went to, and a little bit, I'm not into real strong rituals like a religion, my school, right or wrong, but I like to have a little bit of, you know, I got a connection to something, and school was so important in my life. I mean, I wish I were in your chair. Educator's the most important thing in the world. My dad taught me that, gave me such high education values. I told him when I was very young, I'm going to be an engineer first, but I'm going to be a fifth grade teacher second. because, it's so important. I mean, teachers give us skills and foundations that really will lead to us having the money and income to have a home, a family, nice life, things like cars and iPhones. Yeah. Well, and engineers, of course, are part of that formula too.
But even before you were an engineer, and you knew you wanted to be one early, you were a math geek. You really enjoyed mathematics. Was that something that just came to you? Were you inspired by a teacher?
I think it was accidental, and I'm going to go back. In my head, I remember very distinctly that I was just kind of didn't have any direction in life necessarily, and we were going to do flashcards with multiplication in 3rd grade. And the night before, my mom did a bunch of flashcards in the kitchen with me, okay, up by the refrigerator. And I went to school, and oh my gosh, I had the answers. The teacher said that's the first time a boy beat the girls. And all of a sudden, you get a little accidental praise when you're very young, and it starts making you think, oh my gosh, I'm good at something. If you get an A in a course, oh, I'm a good student, I'm going to study. Studying's important to me. So at least by accident or some reason, mathematics became important to me, so I would wind up getting all the math awards from my schools. And I enjoyed it. But I also enjoy mathematics for things like solving puzzles and riddles, games of life. Entertainment's a big part of my life.
Okay. Well, you were also had a fortunate accident, and that is you and Steve Jobs got to know each other, became good friends, and you started this company that became known as Apple. And I think it's arguable, and I think pretty defensible, that Apple wouldn't have been what it was without the two Steves, that neither of you would have done it alone.
More than that. Apple was very successful, made its marks in the world, made a company that could create the great products we have today and lead the world into this computer in your hand status we have now, when the rest of it was making smartphones that just weren't going there like a computer in the hand. And thank God, but it was a lot of the right people we started Apple with. We had a lot of professional, serious, older people. Steve and I were the two youngsters that didn't know anything about business. We'd never had a business course. We had no money in the bank. We had no relatives that could loan us money. No, we were just in our young 20s and acting like people in their young 20s. But we got around some professionals that mentored us and brought us up. Steve took on the role of learning how to run every department in a company and sort of being at the top level decision. And me, I would only be an engineer. That's it. I didn't want to get into politics and, and criticizing people and things like that. Firing a person would be so hard for me.
So if you and the other Steve hadn't paired up, do you think you ever would have started a company?
No, I would have had an effect, though, because the Apple I computer, I gave it away publicly. It's in the public domain. Apple doesn't own the design. I passed it out to a bunch of people that would meet in a social organization called the Homebrew Computer Club, and some of the academics were from Berkeley and Stanford, and they would talk about the future when people are going to be able to communicate with each other and be better educated and be able to solve problems with their own computer that the big company million-dollar computers couldn't solve. And I love the little guy versus the big guy thing. And we talked about revolution. Microprocessors are going to lead to a revolution. The technology revolution would lead to the social revolution. I wanted that social revolution, those people that believed in it, to have something, so I gave away my design.
Bob Dylan was writing songs to spur you guys on.
Yeah, and that was before, Dylan was a big part of my life for a lot of reasons, especially in those days. But Steve Jobs came down to the club from Oregon, and he actually saw the computer and said, oh my gosh, he didn't even say, let's start a computer company. He said, let's start a company to build one little part of it, a PC board so these people can assemble it easier. Build a PC board for 20 bucks, sell it for 40. Not even parts on it. So the idea wasn't even start a computer company. It wasn't that far out. It's like, but take any opportunity you can to get money, Steve would always do. Because that was the 6th time, that was the 5th time. The Apple I was the 5th time that I developed some product for my own little fun and entertainment at home. And then Steve came and saw it and said, oh, we can sell it. and we always did. And we split the money. And we were a great partnership. And this was the first time we were going to have what's called a company. And I was too scared to have a company because I could never run a company, too young. And he said, well, for once in our lives, the two of us will have our own company. I mean, we'd done so many things together already with building technical products and selling them. Terminals to time-sharing outfits and a breakout for Atari. That was a great experience.
That brings us to one of the great student questions was tweeted in. What was the hardest or most difficult challenge you faced as an entrepreneur? Not as an engineer, but as an entrepreneur.
It's really funny because I was not the businessman and I was the engineer. As an entrepreneur, what risks did I take? Well, sure, to put in our first few $100 to form Apple, I had to sell my most valuable possession in the world, my HP 65 calculator. Sold it for $500, but the next month we were going to introduce the HP 67, a better calculator, and my employee price would be $370. So not a huge risk. I mean, you know, you moonlight. And Steve just lived at home with his parents, even younger, and we didn't really need an income. So it's hard to even boil that down to taking a risk. Leaving Hewlett-Packard was something I didn't want to do, but it wasn't a risk because we're starting with a finished product being shown off. Even before the Apple I was shipped, we had the Apple II demonstrated.
So you're working at HP, but you're actually nights, weekends, all your waking moments building product for Apple, designing product for Apple?
Oh, yeah. When I went home, well, first of all, I was such a nerd coming out of high school and all this that in those days I had little chance of having a girlfriend or a wife. So when I finished designing calculators at Hewlett-Packard in the daytime, I went home, I'd watch Star Trek, I would have a TV dinner, and then I would get to work. Sometimes I'd go back to my cubicle at Hewlett-Packard, and I would work on my own little projects. But I was so loyal to that company and loved them so much, I begged them to make the computer. 5 times they turned me down. You know, but I would not do anything on the side of Hewlett-Packard, and I would never have done anything that would have cost me my job with them.
So you started the revolution. Just how much of a revolution did you and Steve expect to create when you launched the Apple II?
Well, there were a lot of people starting to talk about this new technology, chip prices, memory and microprocessors getting down to a range that people could own their own computer, and every single person in the world would have one someday. And we talked these kind of big, outlandish phrases. But with Apple, we had leapfrogged the industry. We were just 2 years ahead of them. Nobody had ever thought color would come to a computer. Figured out a way to do it for $1 instead of $1,000. I mean, it was such an incredible product that we had very good confidence. And we didn't have money. You need money to make 1,000 computers. So when we lived in the garage, what we did was we got the computers built with 30 days to pay, and then we sold them for cash at the store. That's how we did 100 computers of the Apple I. The Apple II, we had to raise money, and we found an angel, a guy who believed in us, came from the technology world, Intel chips, and he was looking around to spend his stock money, you know, and invest in technology company, and he wanted to get involved in something. He felt that these home computers were going to be real, and were really going to go. The words we talked in those days were very strange compared to what computers do today. You wouldn't think that computer would have made any sense, but he financed us. He owned as much of the company as Steve Jobs and I did. He was older and a business experience. He was a mentor. He taught us what kind of people we had to hire, what their responsibilities would be, what Steve's responsibilities would be, what mine would be. Mike Markula is his name. So he ran marketing. And we were a marketing-driven company, unlike Hewlett-Packard, which was engineering-driven. And he really, you know, guided the company to the success that Apple's known for, but you hardly ever hear about him because he wasn't a young guy coming from nowhere.
Well, since you've mentioned angel investing, and you've actually been a serial entrepreneur. You get credit for Apple, but it's not your only startup venture. Was it in your DNA? Was it in the water of the valley? You know, how did it come to be that you became an entrepreneur, from engineer to entrepreneur, and a serial entrepreneur? I mean, you've got the appetite for going for new technologies.
Yeah, I was not just engineer having gone through courses in a university. I was all my life designing things and hooking them together and building them, you know, from simple little tone makers, you know, on up to figuring out how to put out devices that put balls and paddles on a TV set of your own, a free input-output device. And so I just constantly built things for the fun of it. That was just my side life. There was no plan to be an entrepreneur. And, you know, every great thing I built, even the Apple II, I would have just given it away if I hadn't been talked into going to Apple.
So Steve convinced you to make money out of your hobbies?
So it would have influenced, these products would have influenced the world in their ways just as strongly, you know. It's just that, you know, yeah, you wouldn't have had it centralized in Apple Computer necessarily, but, you know, my goal wasn't the money. It really was the great designs.
Well, you've mentioned iPhones, which is considered a great design. If you visit the Johnson Space Center in Houston, NASA's Mission Control Center, they tell you that all the computing power that was there to put a man on the moon was less than what's in an iPhone.
Of course.
Did you see that kind of a revolution when the Apple II was coming out?
That was very predictable by Moore's Law, and B, the sort of stuff that they have to launch on a satellite, well, it was sort of state of its art. It was ahead of its time, and it led to the chips that we have today. But pretty quickly, as far as computing power, that was very, very minor consideration. The high priority for space mission is reliability. And it had to be built, you know, redundancy and a lot of things. So it wasn't like the, you know, comparing it to other computers. But yeah, you're right. The amount of computing it took is in a wristwatch today. And you know, I would go down. I went down to Stanford Linear Accelerator Center sometimes because it was the state of the art for physics research in those days. And they had an IBM 360 Model 91, the largest computer in the world, or one of them. And it had like 5 megabytes of RAM. Unbelievable. You could never believe this number. And I would go and walk around the building. You could just walk into the buildings there on a Sunday because wherever smart people work, they tend not to lock doors. So just touching machines or being near them and looking at them, oh my gosh, this was a big part of my life. Other people might be interested in, you know, looking at guitars all the time or whatever.
So what about being a technology entrepreneur motivates you or thrills you?
Technology entrepreneur is what's normally, these days, most of the entrepreneurs we hear about are technology entrepreneurs. It's not really the case. Somebody might be an entrepreneur and find a better way to make a table or a backpack and, you know, get going in that kind of operation. A lot of work figuring out how to do it, getting it made efficiently at low cost, overseas, whatever. But a lot of it, nowadays we think of, especially in Silicon Valley, it's technology. And a lot of times it's software and applications. Look at the apps on all the mobile products. Every which way we live our life now involves an app to get things done. We feel, my gosh, what would I have done without that app? I would have probably just skipped it, or, you know, the older methods are so much uglier. So there's an awful lot of room for a lot of young entrepreneurs. When we started with computers, we had an open computer. You could design boards that plugged in, boards of hardware that might control a kind of a sensor of, you know, of some chemistry readings or something like that. You might have other boards that had output that controlled little motors. And all these companies, high schoolers, college kids, were starting their own little companies. I saw 1,000 companies spring up of very young people who'd never been in business before. I felt so good about that they had an avenue now. And, you know, and everything they built helped us sell our computers, too. The computer was the platform. So that's where it is. My own son right now, he graduated in computer science, and he worked for NASA for a long time. Thank God he quit NASA, because it's the same thing, the work to do there. And all this exciting stuff is going on with the mobile apps. So now he's writing mobile apps, you know, consulting, doing that for a bunch of companies.
Okay, so there's hundreds of students out there, and wager that at least a few of them would like to start a company.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for young people starting a company today?
Number one, it takes a mix of disciplines. You really have to have some business people that have been through it before, some older mentor. You've got to have some people that are interested in taking the role of making sure that all the parts of your little company, it might just be, you know, 2 engineers and some software or hardware here. It might be a couple of business deals out there, business development. So one person has to head it. You've got to worry about, you know, your partnerships. How are you going to sell what you got done? How are you going to reach the public and people with it? Yeah, sometimes we're lucky. Apple II, the word just spread around the world, and Facebook, the word just, you know, can spread on its own. You don't need a huge publicity budget. Marketing is ever important. You've got to understand the end user. It doesn't matter what you are skilled at designing and writing your code. It's got to be, what's the end user going to feel about it? Are they going to say, oh my God, this is just miraculous, just what I want. It works the way I want. The buttons are where I want. They're the size I want and the color. You have to think about these things. So, and marketing understands who it's really for and what we should build at what price. Very important, even if you're the engineer. But if you're a businessman writing a business plan to raise some money from all the venture capital, do not try to do it without the engineer being a part of defining what the product's going to be. And secondly, if you have a working model or even a virtual demonstration of it, that is so important, because when you raise money, which you'll have to do at some point, you will own a lot more of your company if you've developed the product further along. You know, if you barely got it started and you get your venture money and then you get diluted down with having to raise more money and dilute it down in another round, you kind of can wind up owning very little of what really could be your own. So go as far as you can on very little money. And it's okay to take a job with a company doing any stupid, dumb job that just pays your living while you're working on your own things. When you're young, you can do that. After you get older to a certain age, you really can't do that. But when you're young, you've got the time. Why do you think all these companies like Apple and Google and Facebook and Twitter, they come from such young people? You know, that they didn't really come from established business companies. Apple's kind of the exception with the iPhone.
Mm-hmm. But it was a company, well before the iPhone, in the mid-90s, it was a company on the edge. It was almost out of business. So
well, Apple had some tough times. We had the huge success, the Apple II. And then we had the Apple III, failed. Then we had the Lisa computer, early GUI computer, failed, too expensive. Then we had the Macintosh, not enough computer for the price, a very weak computer, failed, totally failed. We had to work for years to build the Macintosh because that was going to be the future, but by then we owned a very small amount of the world's market. However, from day one, we had a principle that when you grow a company, you are going to run out of money. You're going to eat up a lot of money. We priced things very high and at a high profit margin so that we would be able to be self-sufficient very soon. And actually, within 6 months, we were. Well, so that's a good feeling, you know, because then you're really in control of what you're going to, you know, the decisions that are going to bring things to the world.
I mentioned to you over lunch, my first Apple computer was a 2SI. It goes back about 1990.
Macintosh.
Mac 2SI, and then a Mac 2CI, and Mac products ever since. But I had to go through a very difficult period when my son was in junior high school. And he came home and he implored me to get a Windows PC because the kids were making fun of him. And I said, that's okay, they'll figure it out. This computer's actually fun to use. Those other things, they're a pain. You guys believed in what you were doing, and you had this vision and this mission and saw it through, you know, from beginning to today, you know.
People like to talk about how we went down to Xerox PARC and we saw their operation of a computer with a mouse, windows popping up. Yeah, and it was impressive, and it was expensive stuff. And we're the company that will figure out how to make it affordable. You would not believe how much work and research we did not to copy anything, to put equipment in front of people who'd never used any computer in their life and figure out what it took in terms of menus, words, sizes of things, icons, where things were positioned, what it took for somebody to walk up that knew nothing about a computer and be able to get use out of it. Because we didn't want computers to be for only the computer experts. And that really gave Apple its culture to this day, a lot of it, making the computers easy.
So you didn't like reading manuals, or you didn't like writing manuals?
Well, Jeff Raskin's the guy that brought this philosophy to Steve and I. And he said the shorter you can make the manual, the better it is. You can make two products that can do just as much computation, and yet one of them by software that you work and put into it can work so easy that anybody can use it, and the other one, only experts. They have to go through a training course. We shouldn't modify our human mind to learn how to use technology. Really, technology, we should put the work into the technology to make it work more the way that we are used to. I mean, now we got a touch screen. You touch something and you move it, right? You know, just like a human does. I mean, human versus technology is the way I think of it. And Apple's been the leader in saying the human should be more important. Doesn't mean everything we do the absolute best in terms of, you know, ease and user interface, but we're the leader for that.
Clearly, you've been credited as the differentiator has been the interface, the human interface with the machine at Apple. Did you and Steve start out with that as a design philosophy, or was there an aha moment when you realized that that was your niche, that was your way to differentiate yourself? Because you remember back to the 80s and 90s, there's a whole bunch of computer companies that none of these people have ever heard of who were selling a lot more machines than you were back then.
Until we spoke to Jeff Raskin in extremely early years, we had never thought that way. We never talked that way. It's just, how can you make computer machinery to have something to sell like other people sell things? Mm-hmm. And the Apple I had shown the world the formula. Basically, every computer before the Apple I had ugly front panels with weird switches that you wouldn't dare touch unless you were highly trained. And ever since the Apple I, every computer had a keyboard and a video display. That was the formula, and the number of chips that made it work was affordable. The Apple II, though, was the real computer that kicked things off, and Steve and I we just knew. We had it was like a typewriter. You could type numbers in, and colors would pop up on a TV set. We just felt it was, wow, this is an incredible and powerful product, but we didn't think in terms of, although it was so much more human. I mean, to put colors, to put graphics, to have games. We had game paddles built into the Apple II. These are human things, but we didn't think of it necessarily in those terms, only that we were ahead of the others and pushing it that way.
Okay, so we've talked about the success of Apple, but one of our students wants to know, for Steve Wozniak, what is your main ingredient of success?
I myself, I was just extremely talented and skilled at computers, but I had a level head. I didn't have real strong emotional swings either direction, and I would work so hard on projects. When I was young, I built devices like ham radios that took weeks to build. I built in elementary school science fair project with hundreds of parts soldered into big boards. I mean, you know, projects are not simple and they're not quick. And you work them and you work them and you work them. You plan them very well. Do all good planning in advance and try to plan it in ways that it will take fewer parts, more elegant designs. It takes a while to learn these things in life, like learning how to write code much more eloquently or with fewer characters than before, and design it just so well. And then when you build it, the building's actually kind of fast, but it's not, nothing's overnight. Yeah.
And it's not linear, so was there a major setback along the path? Was there somewhere along the way where you doubted that this might work, say the Apple II, or?
No. It sounds very strange, and it's probably not the normal story, but in my mind, every single thing that I saw instantly popped in my head, the way to build it with technology. I saw a Pong game in a bowling alley, and I said, oh my God, I have a television at home, I can build one of these. Built it with 28 little $1 chips. And then did a super low chip count design for Atari for Breakout. And I saw a terminal talking to the Arpanet. 10 colleges in the United States all linked together. Wow, that's power. Went home, just designed something to put words on my TV set. I mean, I never once tacked anything that I knew I couldn't really do. There was a part of my floppy disk design that, oh my gosh, once I got it writing ones and zeros on a little floppy disk to store data, I thought, okay, I can read them all back, but I don't know where the bytes start and stop. How do you figure it out if they're all ones and zeros? And I didn't think I'd solve it. I was really worried and came up with a way. You know, and I'd never worked with disk drives or disk operating systems or anything, so it was all brand new. So sometimes you're scared you aren't going to get past an obstacle, and you do. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you think I'm trying something impossible, and you don't succeed. I've had cases like that in later life.
So for the benefits of the non-gray hairs in the room, would you tell them what the Arpanet was?
The Arpanet was the forerunner and the inspiration of today's internet. DARPA, the defense industry of the United States, advanced research projects, they set up to link a few universities together, 5 at first, 4 or 5, Utah, MIT, UCLA, UC Santa Barbara, and they linked them up, and then it grew to about 10 by the time I discovered it. And you could, and basically they just linked them to say, now can we communicate? Can we send a message back and forth? Now can we put a file here and have somebody over there get that file? You know, and FTP was formed, and Ray Tomlinson came up with the @ sign for some email protocols. Little dinky things happened, and I discovered it, and I just had to build a device that called a phone number over at Stanford, got me on the Arpanet, and I could bring up a list of computers around the country, and I could type 8, and I would get, you know, Stanford, or I could type 9, I'd get MIT, and then I could log in as a guest and read files. Wow, I mean, that was way before today's internet, before Apple even.
So I've led you to that path because, like you, I experienced the Arpanet in the late 70s and was working in a government research installation, and we already had hackers. So you said you saw things, you saw answers. Were you ever tempted to go down the hacker path?
Yeah, I think as a young person, always wanted to figure out, can you crack the system? Going through manuals, looking for them, never did it. Never once attacked a computer, stole files, took anything over. The closest I did was, I got passwords 3 times. One time it was a famous phone freak named Captain Crunch, and he was typing on my little terminal that got onto the Arpanet, and he was calling a local timeshare company with it. And I looked down and I saw kind of, he only pressed 4 keys with one hand, you know, on the terminal. And I went down to the timeshare company, and I started guessing, and the second word I guessed was W-E-R-E, and that was his password. Mm-hmm. So I saw his resume in there, and I was going to put in down at the bottom his prison time, but I didn't do it.
It's as close to being a hacker as you
I didn't do it, but I'll tell you, that little Arpanet, that little terminal, is what, by adding my own microprocessor and dynamic memory, turned it into the Apple I. It was just a quick modification to make it a complete computer, so I didn't have to call other computers. No, lifetime goal. I had told my dad in high school, I'm going to own one of these 4K computers someday. Because with 4K, you can write programs in a higher level language. 4K Nova. And he said, how are you going to do that? It costs as much as a house. And I was sort of stunned, and I said, oh, I'm going to live in an apartment. But there were a number of us who were going to have our own computer if we ever could, and boy, and I had luckily the skills to do it too.
Well, many of us have, who grew up with that revolution, at some point imagined a computer. If only they would make one like this. And for me, it turned out to be the early MacBooks of just after 2000. They were called something different, but the titanium power books. And by the time that arrived, I could no longer imagine things that were obvious to come. Are you still imagining computing devices that are yet to appear on the market?
I am a little, but not in the same way as... I found that when I was working at Apple, if I predicted what was going to be in computers the next year, I was right because we were building it.
Right.
And if I ever predicted 2 years out, just 2 years out, totally wrong. Somebody new would come up with a different kind of program, and everybody would want to go that way instead of the way they had been going, and things would switch around. So hard to predict out to the future what it's really going to turn out to be.
Well,
I just look at the best of what I have, and what are the improvements I would like, and and more than anything else, of course, I just like it understanding me. I don't have to think. I just have to speak. I love it. The more and more, I love every little thing that I can speak to an iPhone, or that's what I try first.
Are you and Siri good friends?
Siri and I are good friends. Siri knows my wife. But Android and I are pretty good friends on occasion. There's some things Siri fails at. And I like to carry both, so I have an out. But now Google, right on the iPhone, put in their little voice, system, and so I've kind of got it in one product now. Because Google's open.
Yeah, you put Google on both.
So, and I like speaking because the first day I got the Newton message pad. Maybe none of you have heard of the Newton message pad. Maybe you have. It was the world's first PDA, a handheld computing device. And it was from Apple. And you could handwrite with your own handwriting. I took notes at lectures with it, went home, plugged it in my printer, and it printed it all. Incredible, incredible, simple little device. Eventually got onto the internet, and the first day I got my Newton, I was in the San Francisco airport flying my kids to Orlando for Disney World. I got a phone call. So I wrote a note on the notepad to myself, just a note. Sarah, dentist, Tuesday, 2 p.m. I saw a button called Assist, and I thought it's some kind of menu. I clicked Assist. It opened up the calendar. It put in at Tuesday at 2 p.m. the note dentist, and it grabbed Sarah out of my contact list. And I said, I wrote the note for me, a human, and it understood me. My life changed that day. From then on, that's how I want computers to be. I want them to understand me in human terms. And eventually, I want my little machine that has a lot of human senses like touch and motion and hearing and seeing. I want it to be like my best friend that knows my heart and soul better than anyone, well, except my wife, maybe.
So our budding entrepreneurs out there want to know, what are the emerging technologies of today that you see fundamentally shaping the future the way that your Apple I and II did?
Voice recognition and understanding what is really meant by sentences of words in language, natural language recognition, and also computers approaching consciousness, becoming brains. That's a lot further off. Ray Kurzweil is one of the leaders in that area, and I used to think that'll never happen. The brain works so differently than any computer, and we don't know how it works. We'll never be able to do that. Computers can do the job, but a brain has to figure out how to do it. No, I think computers are going to figure out how to do it in not too far off. And we just about have cars driving themselves, too.
Or you follow Watson, the IBM project?
Yes, but Watson, the way it looks is the image of what computer can be like a conscious computer, but it's really a tightly programmed environment. It's not as much as it seems to be. But what it suggests to us is absolutely, that's the track we're on, is what we see and what we sense, just like science fiction of the old days. And more people are starting to talk about this, computers becoming real brains, and they're going to need the information that's on the internet of the world, though. Convinced of that. But, you used to ask a smart person a question. That was a brain thing. Yep. Now who do you ask? It starts with G-O. God? So now, we didn't design the internet to be a brain. We didn't design it to replace a brain. It wound up doing it by the way that it grew. So I think a lot of the consciousness is going to come about by just accidental discoveries without knowing how it's done.
So one of our computer scientists out here thinking about that future, and you were educated as a computer engineer, but you mentioned your son's a computer scientist. So one of our computer science majors wants to know, what is your opinion of the current state of computer science degree programs? And are there changes to the standard curriculum that you'd like to see?
Yeah, I'm bad to answer this because I don't know the current state of computer science degree programs. I know I love, it's kind of like, the difficult math of analog engineering, that you have to learn to apply and develop your data structures and all that. I think I'm hoping that computer science, that the architecture of computers changes in sort of the next decade to incorporate low-cost NAND flash technology or its replacements. It's non-volatile like hard disks, and yet it's fast like RAM. And I think what we can do is, right now, if we had a huge database, you have to store it on a hard disk. But now we're getting down to the point you could have a huge database totally stored in NAND flash RAM. You know what? You don't need storage commands anymore. You don't need disk commands. You don't just save it there. You just work with that NAND flash as its memory. There are ways that are coming that it works as memory. You just have all your trees and your structures out there right in memory, fully accessible all the time. A whole different programming world. Different operating systems and different programming languages. As far as the status of computer science right now, I mean, I don't know. I have to guess that it's good.
Well, I was told in 1980 not to go into computer science because the machines would be writing the programs and there wouldn't be any jobs for people with computer science degrees.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
So 33 years later, not yet.
No. If you try to do a bunch of projects for your own personal life, you wind up trying to make them so special. They aren't for a company. They're not to sell. They're just to make something beautiful in my own life. You develop skills that are so good, it puts you up at the cream of the crop, and any company, wants you based on those skills. I do recommend doing a lot of that stuff. I also recommend that companies that start up have a way of helping employees have access to parts and tools to do a few things that are just for their own homes, just for their own interest, that don't have anything to do with the company's projects. Help them because they're developing their minds and their abilities to create things, and it's cheaper in some ways than a university education. Once they're employees. Not going to stay in
somebody out there.
The most fun 4 years of your life you can't skip.
One of our students out there thinking about having these skills and thinking about how do you monetize them has asked the question, what are your opinions, if you have opinions, about super generalized software patents and what should be done to address those concerns?
Become a big issue lately, software patents. They did start a long time ago, and they started back even around the age of the Apple II computer. They were talking about how software patents would be handled. Now it's kind of like such vague terms. It's always a gray area. Is it something so obvious to everybody? We got so many patents that just seem so not really valuable. It didn't take a really great mind to think of it. Any little 2-year-old with a pencil would have come up with it almost. And so that's a great problem because sometimes these patents are used to inhibit innovation. I think that young people who are going to go out and start their careers and their lives and build projects and think of new different things that never existed before, not just crank the money machine and build the same thing that they've been building all along. The new innovators should not be blocked. And however, there is some room for patents. I think we would agree because we develop stuff. And sometimes you come up with something very, very clever. And yeah, there is some room for patents. I don't think a patent should go forever. And software patents, I can even understand why software should be included as well. The general sloppy ones, I wish the whole patent department just could make earlier decisions and say, what they do now is they award a patent. And if it ever comes up to an issue, it goes to court. The court decides if the patent's worth anything. I wish they did a better job of deciding how much it's worth before they issue it.
Maybe you could come up with an algorithm for that.
Yeah, put the right people in power is
That's
the main
algorithm
thing. It's just people. It's not an algorithm.
Okay. Well, we're going to turn back in our last few minutes to entertainment. Before we do, we've got a question from the students, and it says, Woz, if you could give only one piece of advice, what would it be? Inquiring minds want to know.
Usually I can only look at my own life. Believe in yourself. You don't have to win arguments. You don't have to prove to somebody else that you're right. If you believe you're right and everybody else say, no, it's not done this way, you'll never make money at it, but you believe in it. That's what matters. And you got to follow what's in your heart. But the second piece of advice is how far you go in life is usually, I was taught this when I was young, and I believe it. It's how well liked you are by the people you work with. That will determine how far you go up organization, chart ladders, and the like. So be nice to people. Don't be cutting them down. Don't be rude and all that stuff. It's just my philosophy.
Stomping on them as you get believing in yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we're going to dance, if you will, little pun intended here. Dancing with the Stars. Tell us about that. How did it happen? How did you like it?
Okay, I don't watch television. Got a phone call. I heard of a phone call one day from my assistant, and she said, Dancing with the Stars. I don't know what it is. What is that? And they got the wrong person. They obviously are way off the mark. I mean, I don't even dance at a wedding. And it took them a year. They're real nice. The producers believe in what they're doing. That got to me. And they're nice people. And turned them down a second time. And then some friend talked me into it. They said, the show needs somebody like you. I said, okay, I'll do it. I didn't realize that friend had never seen the show either. The most fun, it was very harrowing at first, actually very scary, so difficult. 6 hours a day, 7 days a week, so much pain you can't feel a broken bone from your toes to your hips. It's a lot of work, a lot of sweat, and that makes things worth it in the end. I was scared a week before that I'd go on TV and I'd look so bad and wouldn't be able to do it, and then it kind of came to me. And after you've learned the first dance is the hard one, then you've learned how to learn. And I apply that to everything you learn in the university too. One of the things you've done is you've learned how to learn, how to get through projects. By the time you're out of the university, you don't apply necessarily knowledge that you got in your courses, you apply the techniques of learning and developing things. So it came, and that was the most fun, happy thing in my life. I became so bonded to everybody there, so close to them, because when you're frightened to death, you bond. And I'll tell you, I actually did a very, very nice thing that maybe nobody else ever done. I thought it was common. I got this idea, everybody's going to leave little gift bags for everyone else. So I drove around to a whole bunch of bookstores, finding books that were simple joke books, the little tidbits about the world, little factoids about the world, different books. And I put them in here, and I put in some sheets of some funny $2 bills that I make, and some metal business cards, and a little computer-done letter, hey, this has been a great experience. And then I hand wrote, for each of the 27 people I did it for, hand wrote a full-page note of why they were good people.
Oh, that's wonderful.
That was, and left it in their trailers. But I did sort of blog from my trailer something along the lines that would lead you to think the producers were liars, and those producers showed up in my trailer. You're calling us liars. I wrote it, they're as honest as the day is blue.
Well, you said you don't watch TV. At least one student out there is hoping that you watch movies, because they'd like to know what you think of the movie Jobs.
I have not seen the movie Jobs. Cannot comment on it. I've seen one little clip, and the clip was way off the mark. Before the movie was produced, I saw a script early on. I don't even know if I was allowed to have it. Somehow I had it, and it was so awful and atrocious and unlike the way Steve and I really dealt with each other. I really wouldn't. I didn't want to have much to do with that movie. So, but I'm looking forward to the one by Aaron Sorkin. He's writing it for Sony. Very incredible. He's already talked about it. It's going to be 3 1/2-hour real-time events. Introduction of the Macintosh, introduction of the Next, introduction of the iPod. 3 scenes real time. So they'll have people like me backstage talking to Jobs and him giving his, showing his type of thinking. I guess that's how it's going to be. Very creative, very different type of movie. And they're putting big money into it. Got to do about $200 million at the box office to break even. Big money movie.
I think we'll all look forward to that. So,
but the first movie, I think, is going. If it's anything like Pirates of Silicon Valley, wow, that's going to be so popular. Because that's, it's the fun stories of when we were young, just like The Social Network. That type of movie.
Well, you've demonstrated with your last couple of answers your penchant, your passion for pranks. So,
okay.
You're an inveterate prankster.
Yeah, I was my whole life, and I got caught so many times in middle school that I knew how not to get caught in high school. And they would, the deans would go through pages and pages of things that had happened that they knew Wozniak did these, and half of them I had, but they couldn't catch me.
Did you want credit for the ones you did, or were there ones better than yours that you didn't get credit, that you got credit for?
No, I don't want credit necessarily. Some of the better ones, I did get caught for one of them, and I was kind of proud of it.
So do you have was there an ultimate prank? Have you pulled the ultimate prank yet? Is there a favorite?
I have put a lot of money and time, like a month of time, into some pranks, and to this day, because I have it, and I don't think there's one favorite, but there's some pretty good ones. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I got one guy that never bets to bet on me playing Game Boy Tetris. I'm so good at it, I never lose, and he bet on me. But the way I did it was I had a whole bunch of these high school girls I gave $100 bills to, and they started during halftime. They laid down their $100 bills, so he had to come into the bet, you know. Yep. And then I lost. How did I lose? You know, lose deliberately if you ever get somebody to bet on you. It's a standard hustle. He was a person that never bets. So I said, you know, I've got some video that I need converted to digital. I've got a movie I want converted to digital. How much would it cost? He says he owed me, you know, still $50. He says $50. Good. So I went out in front of everybody there, and I pulled out the movie The Sting. He was so pissed.
How did the passion with Tetris come about?
Passion with Tetris, accidental. You know, I liked early games of Nintendo's, and then my kids got better than me and passed me up on it all. The Game Boy was introduced in the United States, the first handheld little video game, you know, play game in the United States, and it was introduced with Tetris. Monochrome, not color, no lit screen. And I started playing it and didn't understand it, and my kid gave me a couple of clues, and I got good. And I started getting better with my friends, and better, and learned a technique here and there. And then all of a sudden, I was sending my scores into Nintendo Power magazine, and they always put me top score by far in the country. And the next month, I'd still have the top score. And then they said, we aren't going to print your name anymore. We want newcomers on the list. So I spelled my name backwards. Yep. Steve was Evitz, and Wozniak was Kainzow. And instead of putting my city, Los Gatos, I put the next city over, Saratoga, California. And the next month, the magazine came out, and I flipped to the pages, and I saw a top score. I'd forgotten I'd done it. And I said, God, it's a foreigner, and he lives in the next city over, and I got chilled. And yeah, one time got to go out and play Tetris on the 14-story science library at Brown University. The windows would light up. It took like an hour to carry up big Christmas tree light arrangements into each window, and one master computer kind of ran the game, and then there were boards floor by floor to turn on and off the individual windows. Wow, across the street, you could actually play it. Wow. I mean, great thinking. The guy who did it went to work at Apple, but he didn't seem to be a humorist, didn't seem to be a prankster. But he had done a great thing.
Well, Steve, we've run out of time, or we've used all of our allotted time. I want to thank you on behalf of the audience, but also hope that you haven't pulled any pranks on anybody in here today.
No,
yet.
And I hope to be able to have enough time to stay for an hour or so before I have to get to the airport.
I think we have a photo op outside.
Yeah, so I can meet as many people as possible.
So would you please join me in thanking Steve Wozniak?
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.